In early 1941, the British Army assembled a secret commando team to go on a daring mission to strike behind German lines in Libya. Codenamed Operation Flipper, their target was the infamous and brilliant General Erwin Rommel. Rommel was a tactical genius who had a distinct knack for daring panzer strikes and infiltration operations. Adolf Hitler had ordered him to fight a holding action on the North African coast, but Rommel dreamed of conquering the whole Near East. The Allies knew that removing him would deal the Axis operations in the Mediterranean a fatal blow. The British began to pull together an elite commando team, searching their enormous empire for its finest soldiers. Finally, they settled on a handful of young soldiers from the 11th Scottish Commandos, led by a brilliant and enigmatic man who came from a distinguished line of British military heroes. The North African campaign had started well for the British. Moving out from Egypt, they smashed the Italian forces in Libya, gaining over 130,000 prisoners in early 1941. Yet, things quickly shifted once Rommel arrived to reinforce the Italians with his new panzer group, Afrika. The British were driven back, outsmarted at every turn, pushed right back to where they started. But they weren't defeated yet. Winston Churchill demanded change. A new offensive, Operation Crusader, would be launched. General Auchinleck replaced General Wavell. New Sherman tanks and aircraft were brought in, and a surprise attack was planned. Still, everyone knew the truth. Operation Crusader might catch out the Axis forces, drive them back with numerical strength and new deadly American equipment. But victory was temporary. The real problem was Erwin Rommel, the mastermind of the prior British defeats. If he might be killed or captured, his headquarters with its elite tactical staff put out of action, then the war in North Africa would surely turn back into the Allies' favor. To that end, General Auchinleck authorized Operation Flipper. The plan was laid out and carefully strategized for the night of 17th of November 1941. Flipper had 4 objectives. The primary task was to attack General Rommel and his presumed headquarters in Sidi Rafah, about 20 miles inland from eastern Libya. This was 250 miles behind enemy lines. Captain John Hazelden, on a top-secret mission, disguised as an Arab citizen, had surveyed the area and spotted Rommel's staff driving near the site, leading British intelligence to believe he was using it as a base of operations. The second objective was to destroy the nearby Italian base, hosting a state-of-the-art wireless communications center. Thirdly, the commandos were sent to sabotage an Italian intelligence office in Apollonia. And finally, the mission would seek to destroy the headquarters of the Italian Treaty Division near Salanta. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Laycock was chosen to lead the operation. His second in command was Geoffrey Keyes, a rising star at age 24. He was the British Army's youngest second lieutenant and had already undertaken secret missions in Norway and Syria. Naturally, Keyes, who had been intimately involved in the planning phase, volunteered for its most dangerous task, the attack on Rommel. Laycock was a veteran of World War I and leader of Middle East Commando. An Army old hand and distinguished soldier, Laycock considered the operation entirely mad. He begged Keyes not to undertake the suicide mission, but Keyes could not be dissuaded. He had been drilling his selected team for weeks now and was determined to save the British Army from defeat at Rommel's hands. Laycock, wanting the best for his friend Keyes, agreed to accompany him and his team up until the beach landing. In Alexandria, 2 days before leaving, Keyes briefed his men on his mission, then sat down and dictated 2 letters. The first to the woman he loved. It read, "I am on my way to do more dirty work at the crossroads. It is by no means an easy task. It is my show, my men, and my responsibility. The chances of getting away with it are moderately good, but if you get this letter, it means I've made a bit of a bog and not got back." The second to his family, which read, "If this thing is a success, whether I get bagged or not, it will help the cause." On 10th November, 2 submarines, HMS Torbay and HMS Talisman carried the men toward the Libyan coast and their targets. The voyage was very uncomfortable. It was unbearably hot, and some men had to sleep in the torpedo tubes. They dived several times to avoid Italian reconnaissance planes. Then, on the night of 14th to 15th of November 1941, HMS Torbay successfully landed with Keyes' 25-strong detachment on the beach of Kajman al-Kalb, guided by SBS teams and canoes. They were now 250 miles behind Axis lines. Once ashore, they made contact with Captain Haselden, who had been on a reconnaissance mission in the area. He quickly led them to some ruined buildings near the beach. A fire was prepared to dry off their clothes. Hot cups of tea were handed out to renew morale, and some laid down their heads to rest. Meanwhile, the weather quickly deteriorated, and Laycock's group aboard the HMS Talisman had a much more difficult time getting ashore. Only Laycock and 7 men managed to land. The rest were stranded on the Talisman. Now, with only 34 of the 59 men available, the plan had to be quickly altered. It was decided that Laycock should remain at the rendezvous with 3 men to secure the beach, while Keyes led his detachment of 25 men for the attack on Rommel's supposed headquarters. Lieutenant Cook was sent with 6 men to destroy the communications facilities near Cyrene. Meanwhile, Haselden's detachment completed its mission and was picked up elsewhere. Heading out on the 15th of November, shortly before first light, Keyes' men moved to a cave where they sheltered until dark. Under the cover of night, they moved off, but their Arab guide refused to accompany the party in the deteriorating weather. Keyes then led his men on a 1,800-foot climb, followed by a march of 18 miles in the pitch dark and torrential rain. Hiding in a cave during the day, the detachment advanced to within a few hundred yards of Rommel's villa at Sidi Rafah. At 23:59, Keyes led his party past sentries and other defenses up to the house. Unable to find an open window or door, Keyes took advantage of Campbell's excellent German by having him pound on the front door and demand entrance. The confused German sentry opened the door, and Keyes tackled him to the ground. Campbell then dispatched him with his Tommy gun. Keyes opened the door to a nearby room. Seeing Germans inside, he closed it, before again abruptly reopening it to hurl a grenade inside. But one of the Germans had guessed his move and shot him. A confused firefight broke out. Keyes was taken outside, but quickly died. Campbell had also been shot in the leg, so he decided to stay behind. He passed command to Sergeant Jack Terry, who gathered the remaining raiding team and retreated with 17 men to rejoin Laycock at the beach. Both Terry and Laycock now waited to be rejoined by Cook, who had been tasked with destroying the Italian communication systems. Little did they know, Cook and his men had already been surrounded and captured by the Italian forces. They could not return to the HMS Talisman because of the rough seas, so they hid in caves near the beach. But Italian troops soon found them, using a map they discovered on a captured British soldier. A firefight ensued, and being heavily outnumbered, Terry and Laycock split up their men into groups and ordered them to sneak back to British lines. Laycock and Terry made it to safety after a 37-day trek in the desert. Bombardier John Brittlebank also escaped and survived alone in the desert for 40 days until he was picked up by Allied troops elsewhere. The rest of the raiding force were captured. It had been a disaster. Keyes was killed, another man had drowned, a couple were wounded, and 28 good men were captured, all for nothing. Churchill, looking back on the insane mission with anger, commented that, "I would far rather have Keyes alive than Rommel dead." The mission was always doomed. British intelligence had been faulty from the start. Rommel actually made little use of the headquarters at Sidi Rafah, having stayed there only twice. At the time of the raid, he was at his forward headquarters at Gazala, 33 miles from Tobruk, planning yet another attack on that besieged outpost. When General Rommel heard about Operation Flipper, he was outraged that the Allies thought he would set up his headquarters 250 miles behind the main front, instead of being in his scout car leading his troops at the front. Nevertheless, Rommel always respected a good soldier and ordered that Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Keyes be buried with full military honors. He even flew his personal chaplain, Priest Rudolf Damroth, to officiate a ceremony in Libya and ordered that all the captured troops be treated well. Wreaths were laid by an officer of the German General Staff. An honor guard fired 3 salvos, and crosses of cypress wood were erected over the graves. Rommel also had their burial locations sent to their families. For his part in the disastrous but ambitious raid, Keyes was awarded a posthumous Victoria Cross. Sergeant Jack Terry and Bombardier John Brittlebank were both awarded with a Distinguished Conduct Medal. Meanwhile, Rommel lived on. The Desert Fox had evaded death, and his genius continued to plague the British Eighth Army for years to come.